Welcome to the first episode of Character Case Files, where I discuss notable characters and character archetypes. Today we'll be covering a frightening character that's been haunting us for centuries. Before we begin, I want to give you some very exciting news. For those of you who don't know, I've been working on creating my own RPG Maker horror game for the past several years. Now that I'm close to publishing the full game, I have released the demo. If you like puzzles, horror, and pixel art, I highly suggest checking out and supporting my game Fleshport. I hope some of you guys will be interested and try it out. Links are in the description of this video. Let me know what you think. Now, back to Character Case Files. The Headless Horseman is that one spooky character that everybody knows, but not a lot of people acknowledge outside of Halloween. You'll hear a lot more about characters like Dracula, probably because he's a part of a vast folklore that many cultures have their own take on, vampires in his case. If you're like me, you assumed that the Headless Horseman was an entirely unique entity created for the legend of Sleepy Hollow. But, surprisingly, the Headless Horseman is derived from a mythological creature that widely isn't talked about like vampires, werewolves, or even reanimated mummies, this creature being a Dullahan. In the story we're all familiar with, it's not directly stated that the Headless Horseman is a Dullahan. As far as I remember, none of the adaptations I've seen of the book exactly mention this either. But if the word Dullahan was ever muttered, it probably went straight over my head because I had no idea what it was. A lot of you are probably just as unfamiliar with his roots as I was before making this video. Originating from Ireland, the Dullahan is a creature more visually disturbing than the comparatively nicer depictions that we often see in film. In Washington Irving's book, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman is a Hessian trooper who had his head blown off by a cannon. Needless to say, he wasn't too thrilled about that and seeks to find his head, or perhaps a replacement. For those of you who don't know, Hessians were German mercenaries that aided the British Army during the American Revolutionary War. They were well trained and disciplined, which is what I think influenced Irving's choice for the horseman to be one. The Headless Horseman's military prowess does make him more intimidating. You can't fight him, you can't hide from him, you can only run, and even then, you're on borrowed time. The HH gallops around on a big horse, black as night, and donned in his armor, probably black as well. Ichabod Crane, the victim of the story, believes that the horseman is holding his own head, which he tosses at Ichabod, who's trying to escape on horseback, like a school bully trying to knock some dweeb off of a bike with a basketball. His head actually turns out to be a pumpkin, which is why we get fun pictures of the horseman wielding a jack-o'-lantern. For most of the chase scene in the story, he actually has the jack-o'-lantern mounted on the pommel of his saddle, which when illustrated does not look very kosher. It's my dick in a box. Ooh, my dick in a box, girl. His general look is pretty accurate to the typical Dullahan legend, but there are a few things missing from Irving's version of the creature. Which, in all fairness, is a-okay, because it's fun to remix and base our characters off of legends. Though I do find it annoying when a character is supposed to be based off of certain lore, but misses the main components of it, or cherry picks the more favorable attributes from it, because then it's really not that creature anymore. Might as well just make something original, right? Like, a vampire who doesn't feel the need to drink human blood, doesn't have weaknesses akin to vampires of mythology, or retains any negative attributes, is not really a vampire anymore, except in label. So what the HH is missing from his origins is a number of viscerally crude features. In addition to being a headless rider on a usually black horse, and carrying their head under their arm, the head that the Dullahan carries is decayed almost beyond recognition. To quote the wiki, the mouth is usually in a hideous grin that touches both sides of the head. Its eyes are constantly moving about, and can see across the countryside, even during the darkest nights. The flesh of the head is said to have the color and consistency of moldy cheese. Well, that's quite nasty. I'm a fan of blue cheese, and I do hope I forget this passage the next time I eat any. Though it also gives me an idea for an enticing Halloween cheese spread, like people will get to dip bone-shaped crackers into a pile of blue cheese molded into the shape of a rotting, severed head. But back on topic. The Dullahan equips a human spine as a whip used to give his horse a good spanking as he's riding through the night terrifying people. He'll keep this up until he stops to herald someone's death. He will speak the unfortunate victim's name and drag their soul away for an eternal rest God knows where. Though he sounds like an alright guy if he's willing to carve jack-o'-lanterns. There's worse out there than spending your afterlife doing arts and crafts, which is what I imagine Martha Stewart will do. In some depictions, he has a carriage, which he decorates in skull-encased candles, human bones, and dried skin used as a makeshift pall. If you disturb him while he's out collecting souls, he will throw blood on you, and you will likely be the next poor fool to be hauled away for eternal pumpkin carving. He's truly a ghoulish entity. Quite fitting for someone who's supposed to be a fae based off of the Celtic god Crumdubh, who would take human sacrifices in exchange for goodies, like food. His favorite method of sacrifice being decapitation, of course. When he was eventually denied his sacrifices due to Christian mercenaries putting the kibosh on such heathen practices, darn Christian mercenaries, ruining all the fun, he physically manifested into the Headless Rider to harvest souls regardless. From what I've seen, most characters based on the Dullahan don't follow the Crumdubh part of the lore, and instead are either restless spirits of everyday people or some form of the Grim Reaper. So what do you do when you come across one of these intimidating beings? Well, scare them away with a bit of gold, of course. One has to wonder, why? No sources that I've found really explain this fear of gold, but it is a common trend for harmful supernatural beings to be scared away by goods that were quite valuable, like gold and silver. Methinks it was a very strategic marketing ploy that took advantage of our ignorance and superstitious nature back in the day. Want to escape supernatural forces beyond your comprehension and ability to fight? Well, too bad, kid. You're poor. You can't afford this salt. The Dullahan isn't always male, by the way, though it's a bit more rare for one to be depicted as female. We usually see female Dullahans in anime, like Selty from Durarara, or Lala from Monster Musume, of all things. In fact, most of the cultural references listed here are from anime and are often women. My guess, 'cause, titties, but hey, Selty is pretty cool. She's my favorite one here. It's been so long since I watched Durarara, but I remember thinking her design and her story were neat, and that I appreciate her take on the legend. The Headless Horseman carries some symbolism with him. In the legend of Sleepy Hollow, he represents the blurred lines between superstition and reality. There's some indication by the end of the story that Ichabod is alive and well, and that the horseman was actually a guy salty with Ichabod for trying to woo his love interest. Of course, some of the townsfolk still believe he was carried away by the fearsome apparition, as Ichabod's fate is ultimately left a mystery. I vaguely recall in some retellings that there is both someone trying to mess with Ichabod and an actual horseman, but for the life of me, I can't remember what show or movie it was. I do think fondly back to the Wishbone episode that covered this legend. Not sure if that was it, though. Anybody else liked Wishbone as a kid? Anyways, the depiction of a headless body, not necessarily the HH, is also pretty symbolic in itself, with some believing that it demonstrates a disconnect between one's mind and heart, specifically when dreamt about. Another allegory is that one is overly sacrificing and unwisely blundering forward to achieve a goal, to get ahead, as it were. I should be seeing headless figures in my dreams more often, honestly, but I'm not complaining. I have to say, one of the most coolest Halloween costumes is a good headless horseman. It must be the biggest pain to pull off though, because you need a horse, you need to know how to ride a horse, and you have to be able to see what in the heck you're doing while buried in a hot costume with most of your face covered up. Kudos to people with that kind of dedication. I think I'll just light my jack-o'-lantern, wrap myself up in pumpkin lights, and go yay Halloween on the big day. I have to say that researching this topic has given me a new fondness for the Headless Horseman and the Dullahan, and I hope that as I research more characters of folklore, I'll find other new favorites as well. You guys too! Hopefully you found this essay interesting, and that it's given you some ideas for cool new characters, like it's given me. If you have any characters that you'd like to see me cover, please feel free to tell me all about them in the comments. I might just end up making a character case files on them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you have a fun and safe Halloween, and that I'll be seeing you again soon. Bye bye!